citizens in this country by our own intelligence and law enforcement agencies. Several Republicans who have seen the document say it exposes massive and terrifying abuses of our civil liberties, presumably committed for political gain. They say the memo shows how the Obama administration used the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act not to protect this country from foreign threats like terror, which is its purpose, but to spy on rival campaigns, the Trump campaign in particular, and to create a pretext for the current independent counsel investigation, the one that has mesmerized our political class and all but paralyzed our government. It's going on over a year. Even today, the president was responding to questions about it. Watch.
One more quick one. Do you believe Robert Mueller?
I only repeat for the purposes of making sure you understand.
One more quick one. Do you think Robert Mueller will be fair to you in this larger investigation?
We're going to find out.
Are you concerned about it?
Because here's what we'll say, and everybody says, no collusion. There's no collusion. Now they're saying, oh, well, did he fight back? If you fight back, you say obstruction.
Sir,
you fight back, John. You fight back. Oh, it's obstruction. So here's the thing. I hope so.
So how do you define collusion? And Maggie asked this earlier during the briefing to Sarah, but how do you...
You're going to define it for me, okay? But I can tell you, there's no collusion. I couldn't have cared less about Russians having to do with my campaign.
It's all we talk about in Washington, pretty much. So if it turns out that this whole investigation is a politically motivated sham, that'll be newsworthy. In the words of one sitting member of Congress, quote, when this memo comes out, people will go to jail. Now, those are strong words. Is the memo that damning? Honestly, we don't know. We have no idea. Like pretty much everyone else in Washington, we haven't read a single word of it. But we certainly take the idea seriously, and why wouldn't we? The most destabilizing thing any government can do is use law enforcement as a political weapon. That's when the police become the secret police, and suddenly you're no longer living in a free country. It happens all the time in other places. Our founders were worried about that happening here, and the rest of us ought to be worried too. A rogue FBI is a far bigger threat to you and your family than any buffoonish tweet from the Oval Office. It actually matters. It could wreck everything we've built here. So this is not a story we ought to ignore. The public deserves to know, needs to know what's in that memo. This is our government. We have a right to know if it's representing us or if it's lying to our faces. If there's corruption, expose that corruption. Transparency is the only antidote. Now, you'd think everyone would agree with that sentiment. Pretty commonplace. And by the way, when you think about it, what exactly is the counter-argument against that? Secrecy is good? People shouldn't know if their government is corrupt? More darkness and deception, please. Even in Washington, you can't say those things out loud, though many would like to, trust me. So instead, Democrats on the Hill and their many handmaidens in the media have a new argument. You're not allowed to know what's in that memo because Russia. Seriously, that is the case they are now making, as of yesterday. Senator Dianne Feinstein and Congressman Adam Schiff, Democrats both from the state of California, are warning that if you want to read that document, that memo, which, by the way, was prepared by the U.S. government for American lawmakers, you are somehow in league with the Vladimir Putin regime. Yesterday, those two sent a letter to the CEOs of Facebook and Twitter claiming that calls to release the memo are, quote, an ongoing attack by the Russian government through Kremlin-linked social media actors directly acting to intervene and influence our democratic process, end quote. Got that? Anyone asking for more transparency from this government, and that would include elected members of Congress and this show, among others, anyone who's doing that is participating in a foreign propaganda campaign that hurts America. In other words, they're traitors. The implication of Schiff and Feinstein's letter is that Twitter and Facebook ought to do something to help, by the way, quickly. Like, I don't know, censor the accounts of anyone who wants to see the memo. You'd think the media might have a big problem with all of this. For centuries, the American press has fought efforts by politicians and those in power to hide unflattering information about themselves. That was noble work. It's the reason that the press is mentioned in the First Amendment. But they're not doing that anymore. On television today, you heard famous anchors make the opposite case. They suggested that calls to release the memo are simply tactics by right-wing crazies and Vladimir Putin to undermine America because they're unpatriotic. And that's when you knew it was over, the long and worthy tradition of journalists as watchdogs, holding the powerful to account. Turns out the journalists have switched teams. They're with the powerful now. They'd like you to shut the hell up. Congressman Matt Gaetz represents the state of Florida. He joins us tonight. Congressman, thanks a lot for coming on.
Good to be on, Tucker.
Now, you have read this memo. assure us that it's not being oversold. You think this memo will change the conversation about how surveillance is used against American citizens?
I absolutely do, Tucker. And there are two things that the American people should evaluate when they read this memo. The first is you've got to evaluate the memo in the context of the 5 months of missing text messages between Peter Strzok and his mistress, Lisa Page. You can't evaluate those two things separately. They have to be evaluated together. Second thing, the American people should watch.
I beg your pardon. Let me just stop you there. How are those connected exactly?
Well, Tucker, again, I can't get into the specifics of precisely that connectivity. I can only say that I don't think it's an accident that Strzok and Page, who were volleying text messages back and forth more than a high school cheerleading squad, all of a sudden have a 5-month black hole in the middle of that exchange right at the exact time that one would anticipate a conspiracy would be ongoing to undermine the president, ending in the appointment of Robert Mueller conspicuously the very day that the Strzok and Page text messages come back online. So it's no coincidence. The second thing you've got to evaluate is the manner in which evidence presented to the court was corroborated. The problem with lies is that you got to keep telling them. You can't just tell one lie. You have to then use other lies to corroborate your existing lies. It's my position that the Mueller probe is intractably infected, that it is built on a rotten foundation, and that it should end immediately so that we can focus on the real challenge of reforming the FBI and the Department of Justice so that this never happens again under a Republican or Democrat administration.
So, and that's right. It's a bipartisan concern because what you're suggesting is corruption so deep and menacing that every American ought to be really upset about it. Can you pledge as a member of Congress that you will do everything you can to expose this and, let people make their own decisions about whether it's appalling or not? But don't you think it's important for our citizens to have faith in their government, and in order to have that faith, they need more information soon?
Well, absolutely. I haven't been in Congress for a very long time, but I don't think you solve a lot of problems by having members of Congress meet with each other behind closed doors and share their outrage with each other. I think we've got to have sunlight, transparency, so that we can all have a national debate about what type of government we want to have, what type of surveillance system we want to have, what type of information has to corroborate the stuff that is presented to courts before people's liberty is impaired. And so I think that that's an important national discussion to have. And I think the only way we're going to get there is by releasing this memo. The good news is that Devin Nunes and the members of the Intelligence Committee on the Republican side want to do that. The Democrats are all over the place. I have a hard time keeping track of where they are. First, they vote against allowing members of Congress to see it. Then they now apparently have their own memo, which is just a ludicrous proposition.
I mean, it would be interesting. We can't successfully get any Democrat on the show to explain. It would be interesting to hear the argument against releasing it. But am I mistaken in remembering that the FISA law was just reauthorized by Congress? I think that's right. Wouldn't it have been helpful to have this argument before that happened?
I would have preferred that, Tucker. It is important to note that the reauthorization of FISA was not a blanket reauthorization. There were additional due process protections that were included. That was specifically for the 702 section of FISA, which deals with overseas collection of intelligence. And when we release the memo, we'll be able to see how that precisely interacts or maybe doesn't interact. But again, can't confirm or deny those details.
So the rest of us are getting really anxious, not because of partisan reasons, but because you want to trust that your government's law enforcement agencies aren't being used for political purposes. Really simple and important. When are we going to see the memo?
I think that we'll see it within the next 2 weeks. The important thing is that now Democrats are making a claim that the memo is conclusory. So I think Chairman Nunes is right to look at what supporting information can be released along with the memo that validates it. I think that will help us to be able to have a more robust fact-based discussion rather than just lobbing conclusions at one another. And that's why the memo hasn't been released yet. I think the chairman and the committee are rightfully going through that process so that we don't disclose sources and methods or put Americans who are downrange in any jeopardy, but that we absolutely expose what I believe is a deep-seated corruption that has really undermined this presidency, unfortunately.
No, I think that's wise. The intel community specializes in releasing their conclusions without telling you how they got there, and it does not inspire trust. Congressman, thank you very much for coming on tonight.
Thank you, Tucker.
And you thought digital was forever. That's what they tell you. Turns out it's not true when it comes to the federal government in the middle of a scandal, though. The FBI now says it lost thousands, somehow, of text messages between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, relevant to the conversation we're having tonight. President Trump just reacted to those missing messages just moments ago. Here's part of what he said.
I do worry when I look at all of the things that you people don't report about with what's happening. If you take a look at, you know, the 5 months worth of missing texts, that's a lot of missing texts. And as I said yesterday, that's prime time. So you do sort of look at that and say what's going on. You do look at certain texts where they talk about insurance policies or insurance, where they say the kinds of things they're saying. You got to be concerned.
Well, it's not even the first time the government has mysteriously lost communications central to an investigation. You may remember Lois Lerner over at the IRS and how 24,000 of her emails were accidentally deleted somehow, and then, of course, Hillary Clinton's 33,000 deleted emails. Tom Fitton is the president of Judicial Watch. He lives in a world where emails are mysteriously deleted. He's dealt with this a lot. He joins us tonight for Perspective. Tom, my impression was, and our cybersecurity guys are always saying, if you write it down digitally, it never goes away. Why is that not true for federal documents in the middle of investigations?
Well, it's only true if it's convenient to withhold the information from investigators and the American people. In the case of Lois Lerner, they told us, well, we didn't keep some of her emails, and there are no backup tapes. Turns out there were backup tapes, and we ended up getting a lot of those emails. With Hillary Clinton, we asked for Clinton emails. They said, well, there's nothing to give you. Turns out she had them all. She tried to delete half of them, and we now are getting the emails that she deleted or otherwise hid. So this is just a matter of law enforcement going in and recovering this material, if indeed it needs to be recovered, or finding it where it's hidden. And if I were the Attorney General of the United States, I would be very concerned about what the FBI did here, and I would send in independent law enforcement like the U.S. Marshals to secure and recover this evidence.
I'm a little confused, though, because these are not favors people are asking of the government. If you're a member of Congress on a committee investigating something, or if you're a citizen filing under the Freedom of Information Act, you have a legal right to these documents. If a government bureaucrat lies to you and withholds them, what's the penalty to him for that?
Well, there could be obstruction of justice, obstruction of Congress, destruction of government property, government records.
Are charges ever brought on those grounds?
They are, if you're not Hillary Clinton.
Were they in the Hillary case or the Lois Lerner case? Did anyone go to jail for
no.
lying about that?
No.
Huh.
No.
What's your best guess here? I confess I'm not an expert on digital questions, but 5 months of emails disappearing from an agency that's famous for understanding how digital matters work, it's hard to believe. What do you think the truth is?
Well, I think maybe there was a technical glitch, but there was little interest in resolving it, and little interest in resolving it still, and it's only going to be resolved with significant law enforcement interest. And I don't think the FBI can be trusted to investigate itself, and this is why we need independent law enforcement, and Congress ought to initiate its own inquiry as well. But this is pretty serious. These text messages are about the activities of FBI agents who have been implicated in massive abuses of power at the FBI, have ruined the Clinton investigation in terms of its credibility. And in many ways, this isn't even about FBI texts. This is about the Mueller investigation, because Peter Strzok, who's at the center of this, was the key investigator in the Russia collusion investigation. Who knows what evidence he has gathered as a result of his partisanship that has now been tainted. And I think there's this race going on at this point where Mueller is trying to get Donald Trump interviewed before this memo comes out and before more text messages come out that further undermine his already really low-quality investigation.
The president could declassify it by the end of the show.
He could click his heels 3 times. We could get the underlying FISA warrants rather than relying on Congress to write a memo about it.
We ought to. Tom, thank you.
You're welcome.
Chris Hahn is a radio show host, a former aide to Chuck Schumer, and he joins us tonight. Chris, thanks for coming on.
Anytime, Tucker.
I don't know what's in this memo. I haven't seen it, and no one who has seen it has described it in detail to me. But they've said it's a big deal, and as a citizen, I want to know. I think that's my right. Does that make me an unwitting tool of Vladimir Putin, as Schiff and Feinstein suggested yesterday?
No, I mean, as long as you consider the source, right? This was written by Devin Nunes for Devin Nunes in an attempt to distract from the Mueller investigation, which they must be very concerned about right now.
But how do you, before you make that charge, how do you know what his motive was?
Oh, because we've known Devin Nunes' motives from the very beginning when he changed cars to subterfuge being followed to the White House so that he could screw up this investigation. Let's be very clear.
But wait a second.
Hold on. The reason why there is a special. Devin Nunes is the reason why there's a special counsel.
I'm not here to defend Devin Nunes. or any member of Congress. I'm just here as a citizen who's concerned that there may have been surveillance of a political campaign by another administration. Fill in the blanks. I don't care. Democrat, Republican, switch them up. It doesn't matter. That's totally wrong. That subverts our government and our law enforcement. And why wouldn't I have a legitimate claim on knowing what the hell happened? I don't understand. How could you shut that down?
I don't disagree with you on that point, Tucker. Not at all. But usually when the Intelligence Committee tries to get to the bottom of these kinds of things, they do it in a nonpartisan way. The fact that this was done in the dark by Republican staffers for the congressman who has a history of covering up for the president.
Well, wait a second. Have you seen the memo? Have you seen? Wait, hold on. Have you seen the memo? Okay, so I guess, I mean, the difference between us is I'm not speculating as to its contents because I haven't seen it. You are. Why don't we just settle this debate by revealing it, and then we can make our own assessments. This is, after all, our country. It's a democracy. It's our government. I don't understand how anyone could justify holding this back from the American people. What's the answer?
I am not arguing to keep the memo hidden. But I am just saying right now that when we see that memo, this is a memo like no other. Usually the Intelligence Committee operates as a nonpartisan body. That has not happened.
First of all, let's just be real. Come on, I've had that Schiff character on this show who's totally untethered from reality, who actually called me to my face an agent of Vladimir Putin. So don't tell me it's apolitical. You can agree or disagree, but they're political. It's Congress. It's a political body. But again, why are Democrats against releasing this to the public? I mean, what's the answer? It's really simple. Why shouldn't we know?
I think they go back and forth. I think they question the veracity of the intelligence used to create it, and they think there should be some explanation behind that. That's the only thing I could surmise from their words.
Well, then that's fair. I would like more information, but like and I see these media figures being like, "Oh, you're attacking the intel community." No, I'm not. I'm an American citizen asking to know what happened, and these people are trying to keep it from me, and I think it's fair to be mad about that. Wouldn't you be if you were me?
Well, yeah. Well, look, the congressman that was on before me, he was attacking the FBI. He was attacking their integrity, and I think that's kind of crazy. I mean, you and I have been doing this a long time.
He's read the memo. Let's see what's in it. I mean, I'm an adult. I'm 48. I can make up my own mind, right?
From what I've heard about this memo, it's a lot about Strzok and Page and their conversations. And quite frankly, Strzok was attacking Hillary. She was attacking Bernie. She was attacking everybody. He was attacking everybody in politics.
Okay, well, let's find out. Let's find out. So I hope that you'll tell your friends on the Hill, on the Democratic side, stop with the foot dragging. Transparency is always the answer. The public can handle it. Treat us like adults and give us the document. And stop this partisan nonsense. I'm with you on that. Chris Hahn.
Hey, look, I think that there should be a bipartisan review.
Good. All right. Good. I agree with you there. Chris, thanks a lot.
Great.
DOJ stepping up its offensive against sanctuary cities, threatening almost 24 of them with subpoenas. We've got someone who helps run a city in California who supports the sanctuary policy. He joins us next. Plus, in today's world, in case you haven't noticed, everybody is required to lie all the time. Professor Jordan Peterson refuses to lie ever, so of course the left hates him. He's here just ahead. Well, today the Department of Justice threatened 23 sanctuary cities, counties, and states with subpoenas if they don't turn over certain records. In response, New York Mayor Bill de Blasio and several other city leaders boycotted a scheduled meeting with the president at the White House today. David Campos is an attorney. He's a former member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Campos, thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much, and I'm here as Deputy County Executive for the County of Santa Clara here in California.
Santa Clara County, great county. Because you have that official role in California, let me ask you this. Your Attorney General, Javier Becerra, announced last week that employers in the state who cooperate with federal immigration authorities will be prosecuted by the state of California, which apparently is now its own country. Will you participate in this? If you find in your county employers collaborating with the U.S. government on immigration law, will you turn them in to the state of California for prosecution?
I think I'm good enough a lawyer to know that before I answer that, I have to look at the specifics of that. What I can tell you is about the County of Santa Clara. We are proud to call ourselves a constitutional county that is trying to follow the letter and the spirit of the U.S. Constitution. And that's why when it comes to immigration, we're very clear that we're here to do the job that is outlined for us by the U.S. Constitution. We actually have sued the Trump administration twice and succeeded in every time. where they have attempted to predicate federal funding to force counties like Santa Clara to be in the business of enforcing immigration law.
Right.
And with all due respect, we believe that there is a role for the federal government and there's a role for jurisdictions like Santa Clara.
Okay, since you're a lawyer who helps run a big county in the biggest state, answer this. Is it consistent with readings of the Constitution ratified by the Supreme Court that a state would actively work to undermine federal law? Well, I'll answer it for you. No. Actually, no. That's not happened since the Civil War. So what's your take on that as a county official and a lawyer?
Well, you know, I don't think that I should be in the business of telling the state or the federal government how to do their job. Likewise, I don't think that they should tell us how to do our job. You know, I have an order here that was issued in the Northern District of California where the federal district court basically told President Trump and his Department of Justice, with all due respect, sir, you cannot force counties like Santa Clara to do your job. That's not their role.
Right, but that's not. But we're arguing. I'm sorry, we're having parallel conversations. I'm not asking about whether you have a duty to do your job. I'm asking you whether you're allowed, as an official in the state of California, to actively undermine federal law and prosecute Californians who follow it. Really simple. And you know that distinction because you're an attorney. And I'm asking you, would you do that if you were ordered by the Attorney General of your state to help prosecute somebody or aid in a prosecution of a California citizen because he followed federal law? Would you participate in that?
Well, look, again, I don't know the specifics of this program. We would ultimately follow the U.S. Constitution.
You're a state official. Okay. Then we're getting nowhere. I think this is something you should think about, though, because we're moving toward a constitutional crisis really fast, as you know, as a lawyer. Let me ask you this. So you believe, obviously, that having more undocumented immigrants, illegal aliens, whatever, people who aren't legally supposed to be here, in your county is a good thing. Have you done an economic impact study on immigration in Santa Clara County?
Well, let me first of all tell you, Mr. Carlson, and I thank you for the opportunity. It's a personal issue for me. My parents brought me here undocumented as a child. I was 14.
Okay.
And what I can tell you is that when I came here, it wasn't my choice, but I made a point of trying to be a productive member of society.
I don't want to be rude. I think you've done great. I'm not attacking you. I think that's great. I think it's great. I'm not attacking you personally. I know there are a lot of immigrants like you who are impressive. But there are also 330 million Americans who are already citizens, and I think it's fair to ask, what effect does this have on them? So if you studied the economic effect of immigration on your county, and if you haven't, and I know you haven't, why don't you tell me why you haven't?
Well, actually, we believe that the immigrants that are part of our county are an asset to our county.
But do you know that? Have you studied it? Why wouldn't you study it, and just rather than just guess?
I mean, look, if you actually look at the contributions that immigrants make on a daily basis, whether it's education, the creation of jobs, businesses,
do you treat your medical care the same way? I'm sure this shot works because it looks like it does.
Studies have been made that actually jurisdictions that are not in the business of enforcing immigration law are actually safer. And we are actually engaging in a proactive campaign to say, you know what, stop demonizing any one group, whether it's immigrants or someone else.
I get it. You know what, I could do with a little less moralizing and a little more care to the effect of these policies on actual people based in numbers and social science, which you could do but are choosing not to. So I'm out of time. Mr. Campos, thank you. DACA protesters aren't just blocking Disneyland. Now they're harassing lawmakers, even Democratic lawmakers. Wait till you see what happened yesterday. Pretty over the top. Watch. Pretty familiar with the drill by now. DACA beneficiaries embody the American dream. They're the best America has to offer. In fact, they're better and more law-abiding than you are. In fact, if anything, you're the one who ought to be deported just so a more deserving DACA person can get your house. Well, apparently some DACA beneficiaries already believe that. They're taking that idea to heart. A group of them recently showed up at Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer's house, where he lives, to harass him for not giving them full amnesty with benefits. Just the latest case of illegal immigrants making themselves unpleasant in a bid for citizenship. Here are a few others.
We will let them see if they will this conservative, this person.
As we fight the fight for the Dreamers, which is our... Do you want to listen or do you just want to shout? Hey, stop it. Just stop it now. Just stop it now. Just stop it now. Let's stop it now. Just stop it.
Congressman Leonard Lance represents the state of New Jersey. He signed an open letter last December advocating amnesty for DACA recipients. The congressman joins us tonight. Congressman, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Tucker.
So presumably you just saw the tape we played. Why would we let any person like that into this country, give them citizenship, let them vote? Why would we do that?
I think we need reform of DACA, but I also think, Tucker, we need border security, ending chain migration, and ending the lottery system we have for visa programs. And so I think this has to be a package, and I do not think we should have a situation where we only address the DACA issue. It has to be addressed in the context of greater border security.
But there have been all these different demonstrations where people who are not here legally jump up and down, make threats, call other people racist, block Disneyland, show up at Tom Tillis's office, come out in front of Schumer's house. Why does no one love the country enough to find out who these people are and deport every last one of them, like by 10 o'clock tonight? Why wouldn't we do that?
I don't think we should be deporting young people who came here as infants or as children, but I do think that in order to address this issue,
horrible?
Tucker, we have to do this regarding border security as well, and I think that's the only legislation that will pass Congress.
No, but wait a second. Wait, just because, so look, again, as I said 1,000 times, I feel sorry for a lot of the DACA recipients. I don't think they had anything to do with this. But the fact is they're here illegally. They have no right to be here. We're letting them stay just because we're super nice, not because we're convinced they're going to help the country. But if they're actively hostile to the country and its traditions and its lawmakers, why in the world would we reward anyone like that with something as precious as citizenship?
Some, of course, have demonstrated at my office, and I try to indicate to those who have come into my office that this has to be part of a comprehensive package. And I also think that the president is accurate, and he will lay out his parameters on Monday. And the president has said that he's willing to take heed on this so long, Tucker, as it's part of a larger whole, including greater border security. And I don't want to be in a situation 20 years from now where we have to revisit this issue because of lack of border security.
Right. So, but when they came to your office, did you think, well, wait a second, get the hell out of here, A, you have no right to participate in our political system at all because you're here illegally. That's reserved only for citizens, that privilege. Did that occur?
I welcome those who come into my office, but I explain to all who come into my office that on this issue there has to be an agreement that includes border security, certainly reforming chain migration and the visa lottery program. These are major components of a part of a larger whole. And certainly, Tucker, I don't think that we should have shut down government as the Democrats did this past weekend on this issue.
But just candidly, between you and me,
in a comprehensive fashion.
Does it worry you, just as an American, that there are people here who have literally legally no right to be here, who are so entitled and angry and hostile that they would scream at our lawmakers and demand citizenship, which they don't deserve and they're not legally entitled to? Does that bother you that they would have that attitude?
I do not like anybody who believes in a sense of entitlement, and that is not the way I conduct my responsibilities, and I certainly think there should be a recognition that we have to secure our borders.
Okay. Congressman, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, more than 1,000 private jets are assembling in Davos, Switzerland. What's on the agenda? Global warming, of course. Your electricity bills go up to offset their private jets. Quite a deal. More on that next. President Trump just boarded Air Force One, which is heading to Davos, a resort town in Switzerland, for the World Economic Forum that just happened about 60 seconds ago. One of the biggest topics at the forum, of course, is global warming, but that comes with a huge helping of irony dripping all over it. The climate cognoscenti of Davos are arriving in more than 1,000 private jets. How could that be? Joe Rahm is the founding editor of Climate Progress, and he joins us tonight. Joe, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Tuck.
So, I mean, it's one of those stories I couldn't resist. It seems to me if you really believe that global warming is an existential threat to humanity, life on Earth, you probably wouldn't be flying around in a private plane, would you?
Well, I'm glad we're in agreement that climate change is an existential threat to humanity. And
well, I'm not sure that it is, but the people at Davos are sure of it, so why are they flying in these planes?
Well, if you want to put things in context, all of the air travel for everybody going into Davos equals about 1 second of total annual global emissions. 1 second.
Well, I guess it depends how you look at it. Here's another way to look at it. Look, I'm not suggesting people don't travel because of global warming. But so if you fly in a private plane for 10 hours, you're using 3,264 liters of fuel. If you fly commercial, you're using 346 liters of fuel. So it's 10x.
Yeah.
How is that justifiable if you believe that global warming is real and a present danger?
Well, do you believe that global warming is real and a present danger?
Well,
because if you don't, what's the point of discussing
I don't know,
this?
but I'll tell you why. Here's exactly the point. Because the people who are flying into Davos make the policies that the rest of us live under. And those policies will have costs for ordinary people in the form of higher utility bills, for example. And it looks to me like the Davos elite are basically using the rest of us as a carbon offset. You pay more on your electricity bill every month, so I get to fly in a private plane to a Swiss ski resort. You can see why that would...
Well, I'm not a big fan of the elite. They are the biggest polluters, right? The richest people. They own the most stuff. So I certainly agree with you that everybody needs to do their fair share. But the most important thing is that the governments of the world take action, and at least the global elite in every single country, but maybe this one, is committed to reducing global emissions.
No, that's actually not true at all. Having traveled a lot around the world and seen countless tire fires in progress in downtowns around the world, I mean, actually you can talk, and this is really my point, you can talk all you want about how global warming is a threat, but if you're letting tire fires burn in the middle of your city and you're flying in a private plane to Switzerland using 2.5 years worth of the gas a normal person would use in a car, like, you're not real. You don't mean it. This isn't serious. It's fake.
Well, I would say you're not serious when you're the United States, and Donald Trump is the only world leader who has said we're not going to join the rest of the world in reducing pollution. I mean, you understand that in 200 nations in Paris back on December 15th, December 2015, said climate change is something we're going to have strong action about, and I'm a big fan of that. But only the United States said no.
It was fake, and it would have allowed the two biggest, yes it was, the two biggest polluters, China and India, to keep polluting, indeed increase their emissions levels for years to come. So I know this is, and you're ratifying my suspicion, which this is about punishing America. Why won't you just look into the camera and say any global leader flying into Davos in a G5 ought to be ashamed?
Well, I think anybody who is flying a private plane should be ashamed, yes. I don't have a problem saying that, but I will also say the President of the United States, the second biggest emitter and the richest country in the world, should be ashamed that unlike every other rich country in the world, we're the only ones who pulled out.
Are you madder at the U.S. or China, which is a much bigger polluter than the United States?
I would say right now I'm about equally mad, but
even though China is, of course, uninhabitable in its capital city because of pollution, but somehow you're equal to the United States. Yeah, that's real pollution. It kills people.
Right, but we put in place regulations which Donald Trump is trying to undo to deal with our air pollution.
Oh, our air pollution and Beijing's are pretty similar, would you say?
No, we've had regulations because Democrats and, the Nixon administration and progressives, George W. Bush, put in acid rain pollution regulations, which, as you know...
I'm not against that. I'm just saying...
Well, it sounds like you are.
Be consistent. Hold people accountable for their actual sins, not just their fake rhetorical sins. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I'm very much in favor of holding people accountable.
Good.
So what we should do is have a price on carbon pollution, and then everybody would be held equally accountable.
Rich people would love it. Joe, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tucker.
Professor Jordan Peterson has been compared to dictators like Mao and Hitler because he won't let others dictate what he says. A brave man, one of the few. Next. Everywhere in modern society, you are ordered to conform, and if anything, it's getting more conformist, from gender to immigration. Pick your issue. There's increasingly only one acceptable view, and you can be ostracized or fired for disagreeing. Many are, in case you haven't noticed. University of Toronto professor Jordan Peterson stands dramatically against this tide. He's become famous in large part because he refuses to be shamed from the public square for having his own opinions. Last week, Peterson left interviewer Kathy Newman, not a genius, speechless when explaining that people do not have the right not to be offended. Watch this.
Why should your right to freedom of speech trump a trans person's right not to be offended?
Because in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive. I mean, look at the conversation we're having right now. You know, like, you're certainly willing to risk offending me in the pursuit of truth. Why should you have the right to do that? It's been rather uncomfortable. That's fine. I think more power to you as far as I'm concerned.
So you haven't sat there and I'm just trying to work that out. I mean,
ha, gotcha.
You have got me. You have got me. I'm trying to work that through in my head.
Really one of the great interviews of all time. By the way, you should say Jordan Peterson has a new book out, 12 Rules for Life. That clip is everywhere. Jordan Peterson joins us tonight. It's an honor to have you, Professor. So I've watched you for a while. I've always thought you were a truth teller. One of the chapters in your book is Tell the Truth. That's one of your rules. What are some of the things that you think we're forced to lie about in this moment?
Well, I don't know if we're forced. I think we make a choice. That it's sometimes a bitter choice, but that's often the case when you're deciding what to say. But my sense is often you're in a situation where you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, so you might as well pick the poison you'd rather take. And you have a moral obligation to do that. So, you know, if you're going to say something unpopular and you're going to get attacked for it, that's a risk, but to shut up and pretend that you think something different is to warp your soul, and that's a much bigger risk. So
yes, it is. So why I would think that even if they didn't agree with you, that people in the media would be thrilled by the way you comport yourself, the way you respond, because clearly you're saying what you really think, and that's supposed to be our charge as journalists, is to tell the truth.
Well,
and yet you get met with these hostile receptions. Why do you think that is?
Well, I would say that's not universal. There's a big battle being played out in the press, say over the Kathy Newman interview. There are people who are casting her as a victim because she's been vilified as a consequence of the interview. But there's been many, many people in the media who stood forth and said that it's necessary to be able to say what you think. So it's not a battle that's over yet. Yeah, it's good. It's good. Surprising, but good.
So if you, in the book, you have a number of these rules, and Rule 5 just jumped out at me as a father. You said, here's a rule. Don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. What does that mean?
Well, it means, first of all, that you should understand that you are actually capable of disliking your children, and that because you're larger and more powerful than them, if you let them misbehave in a way that makes you dislike them, you're going to take revenge on them in a very bad way, and sometimes over decades. I've seen that as a clinical psychologist. But more importantly, if your children behave in ways that make you dislike them, assuming you're reasonable, and that might be something you want to discuss with your wife, then other people are going to dislike them too, other adults, and then they won't teach them things, and they won't pay attention to them, and they'll only smile falsely at them, and other children won't want to play with them and include them, and that's a catastrophe for your child. So it's very helpful to help your children behave in ways that make other people welcome them, because then everywhere they go, they're welcome. And there's nothing better you can do for a child than that.
Very smart. In the minute we have left, if you could pass on one piece of life advice, and this really is a book of life advice, to our viewers, what would it be?
Stop saying things that make you weak.
What does that mean?
Well, if you pay attention to what you say, you'll know that sometimes you feel like you're standing on a rock, that you're in a solid place, and I suppose that you're speaking from your heart. And other times you're saying things just to look good and just to buttress your particular status at the time, and that makes you feel weak. You sell yourself out. And if you pay attention to what you say, you can tell when you're making yourself stronger, and you can tell when you're making yourself weaker. And unless you want to be weaker, then I would say it's best to say those things that make you strong. And you can learn to do that, and it's really useful. So I would recommend practicing that, because it's good for you and good for everyone else too. And so
there's a reason people obsessively watch your YouTube videos. Professor, thank you very much for joining us. Congrats on the book.
Thanks very much.
Turns out a scandal is rocking the limited but